This is People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. In each episode, writer and educator Sandy Carlson talks with a person who has been influenced by poetry and become a poet or a supporter of this literary form. Stay tuned.
Some poets are definitely, let's say, dubbed like, oh, this person's a poet of place, or they have certain themes. For me, I'm always intrigued by that dualities of human behavior, like compassion, cruelty, what drives people to be one or the other or both, and their capacity for that.
Welcome to People and Their Poems. I am your host, Sandy Carlson, and I'm here today with Nicole Caruso Garcia. Nicole has a full-length debut poetry collection called Oxblood, and it has been named as a finalist for the Able Muse Book Award and the Richard Wilbur Award. Nicole was educated at Fairfield University and holds a BA in English and Religious Studies. After 7 years in the corporate sector, she earned her MS in Education from the University of Bridgeport and taught at Trumbull High School for 15 years. Her poetry appears in Best New Poets, Light, Mezzo Cammin, One Art, Plume, Rattle, RHINO, and elsewhere. She serves as Associate Poetry Editor at Able Muse and as an Executive Board Member of Poetry by the Sea, an annual poetry conference in Madison, Connecticut. Nicole, thank you so much for taking your time on a Saturday morning to have this conversation with me about poetry and your work in that area of literature. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to chat with you.
Would you tell us more about yourself as a poet and how you came to become a writer of poetry?
I think it's always a hard question. How would you describe yourself as a poet? Because I'll give what I call the Popeye response, which is I am what I am. Like it's that we can think we are a certain thing as a poet, but only really the readers in the audience will truly know if what you think you are or what you hope to achieve lands on the page or on the stage. So it is my hope that I am an accessible poet. I am a down-to-earth poet. I hope that most people can find a connection with my poems or that they resonate. Like I had mentioned before, like many of my poems, especially for this book, Oxblood, are very serious. I've been told that they're a little disturbing. I mean, it is a book that deals with heavy topics like sexual assault, suicidal ideation, not light subjects, but it is not utterly devoid of humor, and it definitely has some wit, hopefully, in there, some hope as well. I like writing about existential themes, and I lean toward formalism. So, I mean, I am of the belief, as it has been said before, that by various poets, like poetry is a house with many rooms. So whatever vehicle is going to get me there, that's the vehicle I'm going to use. Sometimes it's formalism, sometimes it's free verse. I'm not a huge fan of labels, but if someone were to say, oh, Nicole, you're a formalist, I'd say, okay, well, yeah, that according to the data, that seems accurate. But I'm most likely to just choose whatever the most appropriate and sturdiest vessel is to carry me and my reader with our cargo across to wherever we need to be. As a poet, I would also describe myself as someone who's in alignment with a concept that Barb Jennis, who also lives in Connecticut and is a poet laureate of Ridgefield, we were having a discussion at a panel once, and she said that, you know, she doesn't like to banish certain subjects to the dark corners because that thwarts progress and can, you know, do real harm. And I just felt like I lit up inside when she said that, because I said, oh, that I identify with that statement so much. So I would like to think that I'm a poet who tries to shine light on things that maybe it's hard for me or for other people to shine light on, even though it can be difficult, but it's much better than banishing those topics to the dark corners. So, and I hope that I'm a poet who provides some kind of range. So I will write something very silly or whimsical, and then I will write something that's maybe a not a taboo subject, but something we don't want to be taboo and put in those dark corners, just banishing it there.
I was just thinking that, the humor, wit, and poetry, they're the maybe the twin brothers who carry us through those dark places and help us get to the other side. They both serve that purpose of lightening the load of that cargo that you referenced. And so, and it's funny, I've had a couple conversations with poets who talk about humor as being an essential tool in dealing with things, and that poetry can do that too, that it isn't all hard and grim and dark.
Well, like T.S. Eliot said, humor is also a way of saying something serious. And then recently I had run into a statement made, I believe it was by G.K. Chesterton, who said, someone was saying to him, well, serious, is the opposite of funny. And he said, no, the only thing opposite of funny is not funny.
Oh, that's great.
And I love that. I said, oh, so I have to stop thinking of it as, well, this is a serious poem or this is a funny poem, because you can have a funny poem that is absolutely serious and has some underlying, or maybe not even underlying, serious message. But I really, as much as I read poems that might make some people gasp or they think, oh, this is depressing or this is disturbing, what I really want to do is make people laugh. Like, I really enjoy making people laugh. So the next book that I'm already well and underway in terms of the manuscript has got a lot of poems that are way funnier, hopefully, but it still will have some serious things like elegies. But I think it is very important to have that balance. And I also would consider myself a poet of faith. Like, I don't write what I would call religious poems, but there are religious motifs in so many of my poems, especially for this book. And even though I'm to some degree, critical of organized religion or sometimes even, the Catholic Church, I still do consider myself very much a believer and a poet of faith. I started writing probably around the age of 19, when I took a poetry workshop in college, but I wouldn't say I don't want to say I wasn't serious about it. I just feel like I didn't really have my feet planted on the ground. I don't want to say I wasn't good at it. I just wasn't in my groove. I don't think until maybe my 30s. But I always liked being creative as a kid, whether I was bored on the school bus, making up stories in my head, or just coming up with things. Not necessarily poems, but I always, I kind of come from a creative family. Well, I liked to be creative. And in terms of, topics, human behavior, I feel like always fascinates me. Some poets are definitely, let's say, dubbed like, oh, this person's a poet of place, or they have certain themes. For me, I'm always intrigued by that dualities of human behavior, like compassion, cruelty, what drives people to be one or the other or both, and their capacity for that. Sometimes I have subjects like sexism or violence against women, or things that get under my skin, like various injustices. I have a poem about missing persons, and it's dedicated to a couple of law enforcement detectives I know, these women who help with cases like that. Mm-hmm. By the same token, I have a poem about police brutality that is definitely critical of law enforcement. So like those dualities of people who have lots of compassion and then the cruelty. I'm pretty much open to any topic. I don't want to be closed off. If something is kind of funky or whimsical or wacky, I want to tackle that too. So I like exploring new forms and just wherever subjects kind of present themselves, and you kind of know it when you see it, like the next thing you're going to be right about.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like the essential ingredients for you in writing poetry or writing period are engaging the world through your senses, paying attention to what's actually happening in the world, and identifying those patterns and those dichotomies that do exist within us and within our society. I'm curious, what poem or lyric brought you to poetry? Is there a poem that you can think of that just said to you, yes, that it speaks to me, and this is where I want to go?
I feel like I have to break that kind of into two halves. It's like my younger years and then as an adult. Lots of younger writers or children will say, oh, I love Dr. Seuss. I love Shel Silverstein. For me, as a child, definitely those were influences. And then also rap, like for example, the Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight. We would always play that LP in my house, and we would memorize. It would just be memorized subconsciously. We didn't even try. It would just over and over. And the magic of rhythm, the magic of rhyme, and how fun it was, it makes you kind of gravitate toward that. So when I was younger, it was the rhyming texts meant for kids that are definitely easily enjoyed by older people, and rap. And then when I was older and I took a poetry workshop with Kim Bridgeport at Fairfield U when I was an undergrad, there's a poem that she showed us that, as Emily Dickinson would say, it just took the top of my head off. And that poem is Anne Sexton's poem called Wanting to Die.
Oh, would you read it for us?
I'm going to read, yeah, sure, I will read it. Wanting to Die. Since you ask, most days I cannot remember. I walk in my clothing, unmarked by that voyage. Then the almost unnameable lust returns. Even then, I have nothing against life. I know well the grass blades you mention, the furniture you have placed under the sun. But suicides have a special language. Like carpenters, they want to know which tools. They never ask, why build? Twice, I have so simply declared myself, have possessed the enemy, eaten the enemy, have taken on his craft, his magic. In this way, heavy and thoughtful, warmer than oil or water, I have rested, drooling at the mouth hole. I did not think of my body at needlepoint. Even the cornea and the leftover urine were gone. Suicides have already betrayed the body. Stillborn, they don't always die, but dazzled, they can't forget a drug so sweet that even children would look on and smile. To thrust all that life under your tongue, that all by itself becomes a passion. Death's a sad bone, bruised, you'd say. Yet she waits for me, year after year, to so delicately undo an old wound, to empty my breath from its bad prison. Balanced there, suicides sometimes meet, raging at the fruit, the pumped up moon, leaving the bread they mistook for a kiss, leaving the page of the book carelessly open, something left unsaid, the phone off the hook, and the love, whatever it was, an infection.
Thank you. It certainly shines light in those corners that you mentioned earlier, your conversation with Barb Jennis of Ridgefield. So you said that poem blew you away when you heard it for the first time at university in Kim Bridgeport's class. What resonated with you first back then?
The lines that resonated with me so much, and they became one of the epigraphs in my book. But suicides have a special language. Like carpenters, they want to know which tools. They never ask, why build? And the funny thing is, when I show this poem to students of mine, if I ask them, do any particular parts, do you like any particular parts more than others? What jumps out at you? almost always they point to those lines. So this just blew me away. I mean, starting even with the title, having not been exposed to a ton of poetry by that time, I mean, the title being so blunt, so clear, not dancing around the subject of what this poem will be about. That struck me. The way we don't really know exactly who she's talking to, but she's having a conversation with someone who's inquiring, maybe a therapist, someone talking to her about perhaps her well-being, the speaker. But the matter of fact quality, I think, is what really blew me away, is that here we're talking about something so serious, life and death. And there is no boo-hoo, woe is me, self-pity, the way you might assume there would be in a poem about, oh, I'm super sad, I'm despondent, I want to die, but it's not heavy-handed. And like the chilling authenticity here, you feel the genuineness, the very sad lines. Even then, I have nothing against life. I know well of the grass blades you mentioned, the furniture you've placed under the sun. So like these everyday things that people would do to enjoy life and put their deck furniture out, it's like she's not knocking it. But even so, that isn't enough. And that juxtaposed against that next stanza about the special language and the ironic language of which tools and why build, when ending your life is such a destructive thing. So that tension created there, that specific simile that she chooses, that for me was just like, at the time, it hit me at the right time, I think, also in my life. Anne Sexton is one of those poets, along with poets like Sharon Olds, who were so influential to me, not necessarily because of the styles they were writing in, because I think my style is different, but they, in essence, gave me permission. I felt like those poems were like this benediction of, yes, go forth and write about X, Y, and Z, and don't be afraid of saying these words, and don't be afraid of taboos. And if they were doing it, then it was possible to do. So this poem seemed like, how can she convey something so completely ineffable? And yet she does. And so I thought, well, I have things that I feel like I need to put on paper, and it's going to be difficult, but not impossible, maybe, if I work hard enough. So here was someone taking what I think would have been a very difficult message and a difficult emotion and conveying it, but conveying it in a way that only she could. Like, the advice from some editors is write the poem that only you could have written. Mm-hmm. And this is the poem that only Anne Sexton could have written. And no one else is talking about despair and despondency in this exact same way, and with this tone that seems kind of like eerily detached, and yet it isn't super cold, because she's talking about the body and all these elements. You've got the cornea, the urine, the mouth hole, and warmer than oil or water. So she's much like Sharon Olds, she's a poet of the body, and yet there's this detachment. And it wasn't anything that we said in the class on an academic level, or anything. As wonderful as a professor as Kim Bridgeport was, it was like the poem struck me just as the poem itself, and it wasn't like she had to explain it to us or do anything. It's just at its face value, just knocked my socks off. And it was one of those moments where you think, gosh, like, this is what poetry is and can do. And it's not all like just this rhymes. It's not the rhymes of your youth.
Well, that's pretty powerful for sure. I lost a very dear friend to suicide in 2001, and and honestly, Nicole, I'd never heard this poem before you read it with so beautifully, and the line about which tool, and never asking, should we do this, why build? That language opened me up to the rest of the poem to hear what this measured voice had to say. And I found tremendous comfort in the insight of a person having those thoughts. And I think, I think too of, being a student and getting the poem wrong in school, and I have, like you, I think I appreciate poets who bypass the professor and deliver the goods directly to the audience. And there's such art in the language and in the form, and the word choice that it's just amazing. And it creates a tremendous sense of intimacy with the poet.
It transcends, and like you said, just bypasses the professor. It's an interesting way of putting it. Bypasses and the generosity in the poem of like letting you into a place, even if we're assuming, I mean, we're assuming this is Anne Sexton because we know a lot about her life, but even if we just said the speaker is being generous here. And it was a poem where I read it and forgot I was reading a poem, but that's what I want to happen. I want to forget I'm reading a poem and just get immersed in it. And there's such voice in it, and not, it's not beating around the bush, but it's not beating us over the head either, in the way that some poems sound too poemy, as Jack Carrs, as you would say, like, well, is that line maybe a little too poemy? Because we have a workshop together. Something a little too poemy there. It's serious, but it's not over the top, and it's so honest and raw and artfully done. And it's like we're peering into a keyhole that we're not going to get to see that very often.
And that keyhole opens up onto somebody's soul. And I think something else I take away from that poem is this sense of calm and self-acceptance, which is just really, really interesting. And maybe at odds with what common lore is about people and having those thoughts, that calm is something worth thinking about.
That eerie resolve. And it's interesting, I think, the way the poem addresses the past and the present. So I have rested, drooling at the mouthful, because it talks about twice I have so simply declared myself, possessed the enemy, eaten the enemy, taken on his craft, his magic. And so it's talking about the past, but then in the future, and yet she waits for me year after year. So the past, the present, and then we don't know what's gonna happen. Balanced there, that sense of tension, and that with the image of the ending, like the book carelessly opened, something unsaid, the phone off the hook, whatever it was, and the word we don't expect at the end, whatever it was, an infection. We definitely don't expect that word at the end of the poem to just end that way.
That's amazing. And you said earlier that you could be called a formalist, that not that you're running around with a label maker, but that your close reading of that text and just speaks to the respect for poetry as a literary form, and then form within the poem. And you mentioned being a part of a poetry group, and I know you help organize a regular conference. Could you ask a little bit about your poetry, how it's affected others, and you as a poet in community with other writers?
I'm in an in-person poetry group that meets every maybe like 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, and that's been really pivotal in my development and growth, and also in being able to finish my book. So I love my group so much. I'm glad that we were able to meet over Zoom, at least during the pandemic. But as part of a larger poetry community, there's the Poetry by the Sea community. So poets come out from all over the country and all over the world to, in May, they come to Madison, Connecticut, to the Mercy by the Sea Retreat Center. And that's where it's the week before Memorial Day. We have a conference there that's in person for 4 days. Some people come for a day or 2, or some people come for all 4 days. And this year, our keynote speaker is Marilyn Chin, and we have a guest lecturer, Jahan Dubrow, and a variety of other spotlight readers, such as Adam Bynes, Mahogany L. Brown. And so there are workshops and panels and seminars, and we have roughly 200 people in attendance, but it's a lovely small poetry community in an intimate setting by the Long Island Sound, right on the Long Island Sound. And so it's really important to us that, you know, we're fostering a sense of community, artistic excellence, diversity, inclusiveness, and just a very welcoming atmosphere. And so it's one of my favorite places on earth to be that week. So I work on the board that puts the program together and organizes the conference.
Nicole, what would you say for somebody who hears that and thinks, well, Madison's pretty by the beach before Memorial Day, but am I a group person as a writer? What do you think is the key value? And also you're a part of a group that prevailed through Zoom during the pandemic to give that feedback and to hear other people that you know on their poetry. What's the value of that to you?
You can't even quantify the value of it, because I mean, you get to share, you know, your babies with other people and get the valuable feedback of other writers who themselves are immensely talented, and a perspective that you can't never really have yourself because you're just too close to the work. You don't have that objectivity. So it's like the opportunity to share it, getting the feedback, giving feedback to people on their writing and having them say, oh, that's a great idea, or oh, eureka, like that comment helped me unlock the big problem I've been having with this, or yeah, you're right, I do need to cut that line. I love that my group is, well, they're so sweet, but they don't let me get away with anything. Like, they're not gonna let me get away with a poem that's twice as long as it has to be. They're not gonna, like, I put it this way, it's like the tough love. They love me enough to not let me get away with stuff.
That's well said. Yeah. And,
you know, being in person, supporting each other, like, let's say going to each other's readings, the labor of love of reading someone's work and giving them honest, thoughtful feedback, and the way that you learn about your own work at the same time. And just that you become friends and you become close and sources of support for each other when other stuff's going on in your lives. You know, we've all had difficult things happening and to have that, like a second family there saying, we're holding you up during this. I love them all to pieces. And then part of the larger poetry community, like the poetry conference, it is so welcoming. It is such a community where you walk in and, you know, it could be your first time there, you don't know anyone, and within 5 minutes, like, you're no longer a stranger. You've been absorbed, you've been embraced by someone or multiple people, and it's like, oh, let me show you this, let me meet this person. And it was founded by my late friend and mentor, Kim Bridgeport, who had passed tragically in the middle of 2020. And what she loved was to bring people together who otherwise might not have met, and to just see how then their lives were changed forever. And so that's really what the conference does. You meet people who you feel as if are your people. And so it's for people of all levels in their creative writing journey and all ages. So, for example, we have high school students who come in, and I would say it's not probably for people younger than high school, but for high school and up. So many great workshops, so many great faculty members that keep returning because the community means a lot to them. And just to be there and get to workshop, but also just there's something special about breaking bread with people in person, you know, have breakfast, lunch, dinner with people, have those informal conversations about poetry, and then form connections and learn a lot and get so inspired.
That's pretty amazing that a literary genre can be so transformative for people. And I think that's what I find so compelling in these conversations on people and their poems, is the power of this form to knit people together and open people's minds up to experiences they may never have. And it's, you know, if it's a narrative poem, sometimes it's the story of an experience as well as the emotional impact of that experience. And it's such an interesting and rich way to get inside what it means to be human and build compassion. I think that's amazing. So this Poetry by the Sea sounds like quite an amazing experience. Could you just give us a little bit more information about, like, if people are living in isolation in some rural town in Connecticut somewhere, and they think, geez, I want to get a group together to share my poetry, to workshop it. You have any thoughts on what the best way to do that is?
Well, online, there is Erratasphere, and that is in conjunction with Able Muse. So if they go to the Able Muse website, Alex Pepple, who's the editor of Able Muse Press and the magazine, the journal Able Muse, many years ago, he had started an online forum that has, I think, more than 7,000 members worldwide. So you post your poems, people will offer critiques, you critique and offer constructive feedback on their poems and reciprocate. And there's some people that I had met on Erratasphere who then later I had the chance to meet in person when I went to various conferences. So that's one way to do it. I think in person it becomes a little harder because it's harder to have that commitment. I happen to have the good fortune of being invited into the group that I'm in now, but it had existed for years and years before I was a member. And then I guess they had an opening, and a friend of mine that I knew through the Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield U, he said, "Oh, Nicole, you write poetry. Like, would you be interested in this?" But many of the members in the group were at one time fellows at the or even directors at the Connecticut Writing Project. So I'd say you have to have like-minded people who are committed to always setting a deadline and a date to meet. So we will, at the end of every meeting, we set the date for our next meeting. Even if it ends up having to be moved because of illness or scheduling or something, we at least have that date and that deadline. And those deadlines, I think, are the only reason why there were so many poems that I managed to finish. Actually, the poem of mine, the sonnet I'm going to read for you, that was a poem that I had to finish because I was looking at the calendar like, oh my gosh, writing group is tonight and I need to have this poem done. And it ended up becoming the second poem in my book. But I was in that time crunch, and would I have written that and finished that poem if I didn't have the deadline? So I'd say you have to have a deadline, committed people. Sometimes it helps to have, I say roughly like 7 people in a group, because maybe only 5 of them have the time to meet that month. And so sometimes not everyone can come that month, but if we have a quorum, we will have the meeting anyway. Sometimes through local libraries or just going to various events and open mics, you can find some people, but it depends, because everyone has to live geographically in the same area unless you plan on always doing it over Zoom.
That's good information. And I hear you saying that structure and the discipline of maintaining that structure is really, really important.
But people have busy, they have busy lives and they have activities and their kids have activities. So it does it becomes a challenge. But if there are a couple of people who are very organized and they're committed to meeting, dedicated, then it can work.
Got it. And you're definitely a testament. Your story is a testament to the value of that. Nicole, would you read one of your poems for us? That would be really, really awesome way to bring our conversation to a close.
This poem is called Appraisal, and it's from my book Oxblood. Once raped, you wear it daily. Learn to see the cut, the color, clarity, and carrot. Each time you try to square asymmetry, it cleaves, reveals another jagged facet. Fool, you think it fits inside one poem. No, map with calipers and microscope your story since you came to wear that stone. Flawed and heart-shaped, bluer than the hope. Since you must wear it, hone it with precision. Leave your wrists unslit. the blood unbled, to cut and polish sin to scintillation. Woman, rise up from the rhinestone dead. Yet, what can cut a diamond? Nothing can, except the hardest substance known to man.
Wow. Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome. To link back to the way that Anne Sexton's work had, and her poem Wanting to Die had influenced my writing. I mean, when I think of Sexton's poem, I think, okay, well, there are a lot of people who've been sad and despondent, but like, what makes your pain, your situation different than anyone else's? And that's why I love her poem, because I think it really delivers on that. It illuminates, it makes us see, and without beating around the bush and without avoiding certain words, like she'll just come right out and say, she uses the word twice. She uses suicides twice, but suicides have a special language. Suicides have already betrayed the body. So I feel like she's always in the back of my head when I write.
It's a good voice to keep there.
And linking back when you had asked about, in like, how has my writing maybe influenced other people? I mean, once in a while someone will say, oh, I heard you read in this performance online, and so that made me want to pick up a pen and paper, and I've written, because of that, which is, of course, nice to hear. I had one reader say, they gave a copy of my book to someone who was dear to them, and then that person in turn felt motivated to finally report their own sexual assault. And I just was like in tears when I read that. I was not expecting that at all, that someone would make a major decision based on hearing me read or reading it on, on the page, having that engagement on the page or on the stage, so to speak. I just never prepared myself for that. And in 2020, some organizers for SWAT, which is Suburban Women Against Trump, had invited me to serve as the kickoff poet for the Stanford's Women's March to Save Democracy. And so there was a couple short little comic poems that I had read for that event to kick it off, poking fun at a certain politician that we all know and probably do not love. Yeah, I'd written for when I was teaching high school. I wrote raps for my students. Like I would rap about Halloween, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, plagiarism. Just because it was another way of showing them how language can be fun, or engaging them, or getting them to listen about why you shouldn't plagiarize. So if I make it rhyme, put a meter on it, and they listen. So
that's terrific. It's poetry is about being human and making those connections. So that's just amazing. Would you happen to have any of your humorous poetry with you?
I do. I do. This one is called "The J Stands for Jackass," and it's written in double dactyl, so it's a jiggery pokery poem. Higgledy-piggledy, Donald J. Dunce Captain flushes true facts down his golden commodes. How can we sleep when they've given a guy who is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs nuclear codes?
That's great.
And this one, I don't know, I feel like this one is probably reversed soon, because it was originally called Twitter Permanently Bans Trump Online Menace. I think wasn't his permissioning recently reinstored. But anyway, yes. It goes like this. Higgledy-piggledy, President Narcissist, brags in his tweet storms and boasts on the tube. Normal folks master the art of the humble brag. Pseudo-humility lost on this boob. So, yeah.
I think humor was essential to getting us through those years, for sure. Where would we be without satire and humor during the rough times? So, Nicole, I admire your work and the courage of your writing, as well as the quality. And I hope our listeners will get their hands on oxblood and visit your website and stop by the podcast notes that will be on peopleintheirpoems.net, where they can see your list of upcoming appearances. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really do appreciate getting to know you through your poetry.
Thank you so much for having me and for your very thoughtful questions. And I could talk about poetry all day long.
This has been People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. Be sure to check the show notes for any special links relating to this episode. If you want to learn more about the podcast, visit peopleandtheirpoems.net. Or if you want to learn more about Sandy and her work, visit sandycarlson.net. Thanks for listening.